Welcome to Mint Rabbit Creates. This is a series in which I show you how to make characters in games I like to play. Today we're going to be taking a look at Changeling the Lost. Changeling the Lost is a World of Darkness game. It is based off of the World of Darkness system. It is sold by Onyx Path Publishing, and it is a game about humans who were stolen by fairies and have finally found their way back. Now this is designed to be a horror game, but you can play it to take away a good amount of the horror if you'd like. You can kind of choose how scary you want this game to be. For this character creation tutorial, I should let you know that I am going to be using a template from the character creation tutorial for the World of Darkness character. So if you are going to make this character, I recommend taking a look at the World of Darkness tutorial first, because that will show you the basics that are the same for both World of Darkness and Changeling the Lost characters. This tutorial is going to show you where to get the resources for a Changeling specific character, and it's going to explain the pieces of a Changeling character sheet that are different from a World of Darkness character sheet. So, now that we have that out of the way, let's take a look at what we're going to need in order to make our Changeling character. First of all, we are going to need a character sheet from this website. This may be familiar if you've taken a look at the World of Darkness video. We're going to go to the Chronicles of Darkness character sheets and click on Changeling. And it will bring us to the first edition and second edition sheets. For this one, we're making a first edition character, but you can see that there are also second edition sheets available if that's the character that you would like to make. We have a number of different pages available. We have 1-page sheets, 2-page sheets, 4-page sheets, and also some sheets that can be used for the GM. For this one, we're going to be using the Changeling the Lost 2-page interactive sheet. You can also get printable sheets from this if you would rather have a printed off sheet. It may be useful for getting certain things onto the character sheet that are a little bit tricky with the form fillable version, but this version works fine enough. As you'll see, the bottom, the second half of the Changeling character sheet looks a little bit different from the second half of the World of Darkness character sheet, and that's because there are some Changeling mechanics that work a little bit differently, and this gives us a little more room to store it onto. The 1-page sheet should give you everything you need for a basic character, but I do like having some extra room in case I want to take some notes. We're also going to be using the White Wolf wiki for some information about our characters. This wiki has updated version for the second edition, so again, if you're looking for some information about the second edition, you might find some of that information here. We also have the Codex of Darkness website. We're going to be using a couple of different pages from the Codex of Darkness website. For example, we're going to be taking a look at Changeling merits, and we're also going to be taking a look at Changeling contracts. There are both first edition and second edition contracts and merits on this website, so if you're looking for the second edition contracts and merits, you should also be able to find them here. So, like I said before, I already have a World of Darkness character that I made that I'm going to be using as the template for our character today. So I've already taken a Changeling the Lost character sheet and filled out the relevant pieces of information. So now we have to think about what kind of character we want to make for Changeling the Lost. And so the first thing we're going to consider is our Changeling seeming. And that information we can find a little bit about on this website here. So first things first, we have 6 different seemings for Changeling the Lost. These seemings are going to tell us something about the kind of experience our character had while they were in Arcadia. We have beasts. Beasts are going to be humans that were treated like animals while they were in Arcadia. They probably have animal traits to some extent. They have a lot of habits that are going to be considered a little bit animalistic. So if you like a character that works on instinct, a beast is the kind of character you might be interested in. We have darklings. Darklings are characters who are brought into Arcadia because they probably did something wrong, and they end up in a place where morality is very gray, and they often take on the appearance of nightmares. So if you like spooky changelings, this is the kind of character you might want to play. Elementals are going to be characters that were taken into Arcadia and changed in a very drastic way, and they were usually turned into part of the scenery or part of the room. So these are people who were turned into wind or trees, or perhaps they were put on a pedestal in the center of the room. These are going to be changelings that are very malleable, so you can kind of make this character whatever you want. If you're wanting to have a changeling that's kind of a little bit of everything, an elemental might be something that you're interested in. We have the fairest seeming. So the fairest are the fairest of them all. That's why they're called that. They were often taken because they were exceptional, not only in looks, but also in different kinds of talents. They are going to be very social characters. They're going to be very artistic. They were kind of pampered in Arcadia, but only to a certain point, kind of like how a pretty bird is put into a cage or something like that. So the fairest have a little bit of a complex going on where they never believe they're good enough. And so if that's something that's kind of interesting to you, this is the kind of character you might be wanting to look at. Then we have ogres. Ogres are going to be usually pretty hulking, pretty imposing. They're going to be the least aesthetically pleasing out of the changelings, and their experience on Arcadia was probably the most physically brutal. Ogres were usually put to hard work. They were usually given less than appetizing food, and they were usually submitted to harsher punishments than other changelings. And then finally, we have the wizened. The wizened are changelings who ended up in Arcadia by accident. They were put to work because their fairy keepers just needed something for them to do. And they only escaped because they were so good at their jobs, they managed to find a loophole to get themselves out of it. Wizened are going to be characters whose entire identity is wrapped up in their craft. So if you want to be a changeling who's known for what they do more than who they are, then this is the kind of character you might be interested in. As you can see, all of the seemings are subdivided into something called kiths. Kiths are the name that we use for the specific kind of changeling we are within the seeming. It contains a lot of information about what our appearance is, what our experience might have been, and what kind of special abilities we get. So you're going to see that a lot of the kiths have something saying blessing and then a name after it, and that's the special ability you get when you choose that kith. The kiths are going to be different categories depending on the kind of seeming that you're in. So wizened kiths are going to be different kinds of jobs, whereas ogre kiths are going to be different kinds of ogres. We have different kinds of fairests, different ways to kind of stand out from a crowd. We have different elements that elementals could identify with, including man-made things. We have darklings, which are going to be different nightmares, different ways of scaring people. And then beasts, you're going to be looking at the element of the beast that you're interested in. So if you want to be a cat, you could be a hunter heart because you're being a hunter, but you can also be a true friend because you're more like a house cat. You're more of a pet than something who hunts. For our character, I want to think about where we're coming from. And when I talk to other people who are making changeling characters, I usually recommend that they think of some kind of genre or movie that they're really interested in. So, for example, if I was talking to somebody who really likes Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean, I could recommend that they play a elemental waterborne, perhaps, or maybe they want to be a beast swimmer skin, for example, really playing up on the fact that Davy Jones is someone who lives underwater. But there's a lot of ways that you could make Davy Jones work in this, so you're not restricted to those, but that's kind of like an easy way to find something that's easy to play for you. I'm going to go for a fairest kith because our character is a smooth talking barista. So our character is someone who we already know is very socially adept, and I really want to play up on that. I want them to increase their social abilities. So we're going to choose fairest, and we're going to choose, well, let's take a look at what we're going to choose. We have a bunch of different options here. We have fairests that are going to be flower aspected. We have fairests that are going to be dancers. We have draconic fairests if you want to be someone who's got all of the allure of a dragon. But for this character, I'm interested in the telluric. So this here tells us that tellurics are fairests imbued with the essence and spirit of celestial bodies. These are fairests that take after the stars, and they get a blessing called Music of the Spheres. So if we click on that, this is the special ability that the telluric get. They can count down ticking seconds as accurately as a stopwatch. They have an uncanny knowledge of precise time, and it gives them a +3 bonus to any actions that might require precise timing. In addition, they gain free specialties of astronomy and astrology to their academics and occult skills. As you can see, this is a very, very specific application of a skill. And these are very, very specific specialties. Specialties are supposed to be specific. It does give us a lot of cool things, and it also tells us something about our character. We've got a barista who's into horoscopes and who's into telling people's futures by looking at what's going on in the night sky. So we're going to put all of that onto our character sheet. First things first, let's find the telluric over here. And we're going to go down to the second page to put some information about our kith ability. We have a drop-down menu that has every single kith ability for the first edition kits. And underneath fairest, right here, Music of the Spheres. Now here I'm going to put the +3 bonus. And up here, I need to edit some of my skills. All right, so we don't have any dots in academics, and while I could put a specialty there without a dot, I would rather have that dot because it makes that specialty all the more useful to me. So I'm going to take a dot out of investigation, and I'm going to put it into academics, and I'm going to add the astrology to my occult. And there we go. Now that we have the kith figured out for our character, before we move any farther, we have to talk about a couple different traits on our character sheet that exist for changelings and changelings only. The first trait that we're going to take a look at is our weird. Changelings start off with 1 dot in weird, and it reflects their magical abilities. Your changeling is probably going to increase their ability to use their magical powers as time goes on, and that increase will be reflected in a growing number of weird dots. Your weird determines a couple of things. It will determine what reacts to your character in a place called the Hedge, which is this kind of border world in between our world and Arcadia, which is fairyland. Weird also determines how much glamour you can hold. Glamour, as you can see right below weird, is your magical resource. You spend points of glamour to be able to do things, and you gain points of glamour by feeding off of humans' emotions. With a starting point of 1 weird, you can hold up to 10 points of glamour. Because we are a starting character, we are going to start with 5 points of glamour. And that's because we will have the ability to gain more as soon as we start playing. Because we have a single dot of weird, our character can spend 1 point of glamour per turn. And that's going to be important when we take a look at our contracts, because our contracts depend a lot on our weird and our glamour. The next trait that we're going to take a look at is our clarity. Now, with our World of Darkness character, we had a scale called morality, and changelings have something similar that is called clarity. We start at level 7 in clarity. As you can see, that is considered pretty standard, and anything above it is pretty good. Clarity is something that you can increase with a lot of hard work, and something that can decrease very, very easily. It represents your character's ability to understand what is magical and what is not. The lower your character's clarity goes, the less they are able to differentiate between what is part of the real world and what is part of fairy. Clarity can be tricky to play with. Sometimes we don't really want to explore what madness looks like or how it affects mental health, so I would consider this to be more of an optional system. It depends on what the group is okay with. You can also modify it so that it reflects the kinds of emotions that your character is feeling. So perhaps rather than taking on things that are traditionally associated with mental illness, you can talk about increasing fear or increasing anger or increasing frustration, and how your character has to kind of stabilize their life in order to deal with those emotions. There are things that traditionally might be considered positive events, like getting married or finding a new house, that for changelings can be very disruptive and actually lowers their clarity. And there's also certain acts that only changelings can do that regular humans wouldn't have to deal with, because regular humans don't have magical doubles, and regular humans don't usually talk to fairy lords themselves. So again, clarity is something you're going to want to talk to your GM about before you start play. Now there's one other piece that we want to take a look at before we move on, and that is a little bit of information at the bottom of the first page that tells us that we choose 1 free skill specialty in athletics, brawl, or stealth. This is a changeling specific specialty. That is to say, this is something we get because we're changelings. For this character, I think that we're going to give them a specialty in stealth. I want to reflect a little bit of the changeling part of them rather than the human part. And I do want to emphasize something in their physical arena, because we've spent a lot of time on their social. For stealth, because they are a telluric, I think I'm going to talk about having some kind of stealth outdoors at night. So I'm going to say night skies. This is something that could be interpreted in a number of ways. Maybe they are better stealthing outdoors at nighttime. Perhaps if they were jumping from roof to roof, they would blend in with the sky above them. And it fits a little bit with the kind of character that we're building. Now, the next thing that we want to take a look at is our merits. Now you may notice that there is no common sense merit on this character sheet. I took that merit away from the World of Darkness character sheet when I moved it over, because I wanted to take a look at some of the Changeling merits. I also think that this character has a little less common sense than their World of Darkness counterpart. So we still have 4 dots of merits that we can spend for this character. Now, this is where we go to the Codex of Darkness, and I'm going to talk about some very specific merits before I choose any for our character. The first one that I want to take a look at is Harvest. Harvest is your ability to increase how much glamour you gain when you do certain things. You are still able to accumulate glamour without it, but it makes it more effective. When you choose a dot in Harvest, each dot represents a different source of glamour. So you could take a single dot in Harvest and say that you have a consistent source of emotion that you pull glamour from. You could take a second dot and say that you also have a consistent source in dreaming. Our character is going to take a dot in Harvest, so I'm going to put that here. And just scroll down to the Changeling ones and put a dot there. I also want to talk about Mantle. So in Changeling, you're going to get membership in something called a court. I'm going to explain a little bit down the road how a court works, but basically a court is a political affiliation that also gives you certain magical powers. And your mantle is going to increase your standing within that court. It's basically a benefit when you're interacting with members of your court, and also gives you bonuses when you're using special pieces of magic that are associated with the court that you're part of. I'm also going to take a dot in Mantle for this character, and when you write this down, you might want to indicate what court this mantle is in. We'll decide that when I get to the court that this character is part of. There's also something called Court Goodwill, which reflects your favor with members of courts outside of your own, but you have to choose the specific court that you have Court Goodwill with. So you could take Court Goodwill a number of times with a number of different courts. Finally, one of the Changeling merits that you should know about is the Hollow. Now, the Hollow is a very long-term kind of merit because hollows are something that usually a group is going to work on together. A hollow is a safe place for your changelings. It is a place that exists between the real world and the hedge that the changelings can use to rest and recuperate and work on special projects without worrying about being found or bothered. Hollows can be very, very big and complex, and they can have a lot of security measures, and it depends on how many dots you're willing to put into the hollow. You can take 1 to 5 dots in size, and then additionally 1 to 5 dots in security, additionally 1 to 5 dots in amenities, so things that you can find within the hollow, and 1 to 5 dots indoors, which is how accessible the hollow is. Usually, different members of a crew will take dots in a certain aspect of the hollow, so if you were to take this, you would choose between security, size, amenities, and doors, and then however many dots you want to put into it. I'm not going to take hollow for this character because they're a starting character, they probably don't have a motley yet, and it's something that you would probably want to work on with the group to know exactly what you want your home base to look like. That being said, it's very good to know how it works. Now, when we're taking a look at a lot of these merits, you're going to see prerequisites, just like you saw with universal merits. Some of these merits have pretty high weird prerequisites, so they're definitely not available at character creation. Some of them have skill prerequisites. This one here has a clarity prerequisite. For our character, I think I'm just going to take a 2-dot merit because that's the amount that we have dots left for. And I think I'm going to go for Rigid Mask. It requires a subterfuge of 2, and it allows you to hide your emotions very well, even from lie detectors. Well, we have a subterfuge of 2, so we are going to go for Rigid Mask. And if we wanted more information, this will also tell us that it is in a book called Rites of Spring. So that is the page that we would have to look at. A few final notes about merits before we move on. First of all, we cannot take any of the supernatural merits that you see in the World of Darkness rulebook, nor can we take the merit that says Unseen Sense. And there's a few reasons for this. First of all, those merits are available for mortals, and changelings are not technically mortals. They're supernatural characters, and they have access to their own supernatural abilities. Unseen Sense usually gives a mortal a sense that something is off, or something that is not normal. Changelings already know that things are not normal, and they have their own ways to find out when something is off, so they don't need access to those merits. Finally, we also want to make sure that we have a note that tells us what we're using Harvest for. So I've just put a little note down here that tells us that we're using Harvest to get glamour from emotions. And we're probably going to choose a specific emotion, and we will choose that when we choose our court. Speaking of courts, let's take a look at courts and see what we're going to choose for our character. So in Changeling Society, the organization of changelings that you're going to live in is called a freehold. And a freehold is a way to protect the people who are living in that city or town, while also organizing power so that changelings have the ability to hide from the Fae. The freehold is divided up into 2 to 4 courts, usually, and those courts are going to either control different areas of the city or different times of the year, and continuously give up their power. And it's the ability to give up your power that gives you protection. There are rules for courts for both the first edition and the second edition. Both of them are available on this website. Today, we're just going to be taking a look at the first edition options. The second edition, you can take a look at it if you're going to be playing in a second edition game. Now, within the first edition, there are a number of different themes when it comes to how the courts are organized. So we have seasonal courts, directional courts, day and night courts, transitional courts, and the courtless. When it comes to what court you're going to be playing in, you first have to talk to your GM and ask them how the freehold is organized. Are they going to be using seasonal courts? Are they going to be using day and night courts? Are they going to be using more than one series of courts? It's possible, although it becomes way more complex when that happens. Once you know what kinds of courts are being used in the freehold, then you'll know what your options are. Most often, your options are going to be within the seasonal courts because those are the courts that come in the Changeling the Lost rulebook, so every GM has access to it, and they also are the most fleshed out. There are more options when it comes to seasonal courts than there are to anything else. You also have the option to play courtless in a lot of Changeling the Lost games. That is someone who does not belong to a specific court. If you belong to a court, you have a lot of responsibilities, and the court is going to depend on you for certain things. But you also get access to certain kinds of magic, and you only get access to them by growing in reputation as part of a court. If you're courtless, you don't have the same responsibilities or rules that you have to follow, but you also have less access to a lot of different kinds of magic. So it's a bit of a trade-off. So for this video, let's just take a look at the seasonal courts and see what they have to offer. So first things first, we have the Spring Court. The Spring Court focuses on hiding from the Fae by living amongst mortals, and they thrive on desire. So we talked a little bit about how changelings harvest glamour from different places, and one of those places is human emotions. So each court is going to have a chosen emotion that they gather more glamour from. And in the spring, that happens to be desire. So spring courtiers are gathering desire from humans and also helping humans fulfill their desires. They're also helping themselves fill their own desires. And the reason they do that is because they believe that they will be able to hide themselves from the Fae by being happy. They believe that no Fae keeper will understand the ability of a changeling to still be happy after escaping fairy. So it's kind of a defensive mechanism. Then we have the Summer Court. The Summer Court seeks to strike out against the Fae directly, and they thrive off of wrath. So the Summer Court is probably going to be feeding off of the anger of mortals. They may be stoking them a little bit with some frustration or anger, but the reason that they do so is because they believe that the only way to really deal with the Fae is to take them on in a very overt fight. They're going to be the most martial out of all of the seasonal courts, and you don't have to be a physical character to join the Summer Court, but you have to be devoted to the effort of defeating the Fae on a very face-to-face kind of conflict. Then we have the Autumn Court. They explore the powers of fairy magic and the enigmas of the unknown. They thrive on fear. So the Autumn Court is very big on intimidating others, of making others feel afraid, of stoking the fears of people even subconsciously. And the reason they do so is because they want to fight the Fae, but they want to do it using magic and intimidation and secrets. So they're going to be finding all of the backdoor solutions to problems. And they're going to be finding ways to gain power over the Fae in subtle ways so that they don't have to fight them head on. Finally, we have the Winter Court. The Winter Court are masters of deception and keepers of mystery, and they thrive on sorrow. They thrive off the grief and pain of other people. And that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to explicitly cause that pain, but when they see that sorrow, they're going to allow themselves to really experience what it means to be sad. Now, the reason they do that is because they believe that there is no true victory over the Fae. The Fae are too powerful and too large and too magical. And so the best thing to do is to hide yourself and make yourself so completely boring that they're not going to want to notice you again. So the Winter Court is very focused on finding safe places and coming up with fake identities and allowing themselves to make a place for themselves without leaving a mark on the greater world. So yeah, those are the 4 seasonal courts. Now we need to choose which court is going to work best for our character. So our character is someone who has a lot of social abilities. They're very outgoing, overt. I don't think that they're going to be in winter at all. I do feel like the easy answer is to put them into spring, but I don't want to do that. I think that this character is more angry about all of the things that they kind of lost while they were in Arcadia. So I'm going to put them into summer. And so what that means is that when we go down to our harvest ability, we're going to add that they gain more emotional energy from anger than any other emotion. So that's where they're going to get a lot of their glamour. And we're also going to make sure that we know that their mantle is for the summer court. And now the only thing that's left to do is to figure out our character's contracts. So contracts are going to be the Changeling specific magical abilities that you get for playing Changeling the Lost. Contracts are going to depend on weird and glamour a lot of the time, and they are separated into 4 different kinds of contracts. You have universal contracts, you have seeming contracts, you have court contracts, and you have goblin contracts. Universal contracts are going to be forms of magic that are available to everybody. You are going to be able to buy more dots of contracts with experience points, and universal contracts are the same price for everybody regardless of the kind of character that you're playing. Seeming contracts are contracts that are going to be cheaper for your character if you are playing within the correct seeming. So as a fairist, it will be easier for us to have access to fairist contracts than it will be for us to buy, say, beast contracts. Then we have court contracts. Court contracts are contracts that are only available to you if you are in the correct court. So our character has access to summer contracts, but not winter contracts, for example. The only way that our character would have access to any other court contracts is to gain goodwill with that specific court. And even then, your ability to grow within that contract is a little bit limited. Some court contracts also depend on your mantle, not to say that you need to have a specific mantle to have access to them, although some of them might have that, but having a higher mantle will increase your effectiveness in using that contract. Finally, we have goblin contracts. They're not typically available at character creation. They're usually things that you're going to buy with experience. Goblin contracts are ways of doing magic, but they have a higher cost because you're buying them from hobgoblins, which are kind of amoral NPCs in the world of Changeling. Because you're usually buying them from goblins, that's usually why you don't have them at character creation. You'll probably get them throughout play when you have the ability to talk to a goblin. Some GMs might have different rules about that, so something you're going to want to ask your GM about, but just be aware that those contracts do exist within this game. At character creation, we have some limitations on contracts. So we have 5 dots in contracts that we can choose, and we have to have at least 1 dot in a contract that is associated with either our seeming or our court. So we must choose at least 1 contract from the fairest list or the summer list at character creation. I'm also going to make a recommendation that when you're choosing clauses from contracts, even though you have the ability to buy up to 5 dots in a single contract, I don't recommend it because at character creation you do not have the resources to be able to succeed at the higher level contracts. Higher level contracts will require a larger amount of weird. They may require a larger glamour expenditure, which you just don't have access to. And they have very, very specific catches, which are things that you can kind of do to avoid paying the glamour cost that are incredibly hard to fulfill the higher you go. So we're going to take a look at a number of different contracts and see which ones we want to take like the first or second clause in. So let's take a look at contracts and see how they work. So this is the Codex of Darkness website once again. There are both options for the first edition and the second edition contracts. You're just going to have to look in the search bar for the second edition if that's what you're looking for. And let's take a look at how these contracts are laid out. So first we're going to have the contract on the farthest left side here. These are going to be the different clauses within each contract, and these black bars here will tell us what kind of contract it is. Then we have the rank, so that's the number of dots in that contract that it takes. So if you have the third clause, you also have access to the second and the first. That's how these contracts work. Then you have the cost. So the cost is the amount of glamour that you have to spend to be able to fulfill that contract. So as you'll see, for contracts of the board, the first and second clause require a single dot of glamour. The third clause requires 3 dots of glamour. And then the fourth and fifth clause have willpower costs. The fourth clause has an optional willpower cost, and the fifth dot has a mandatory willpower cost. So that means that you're not only paying 4 dots of glamour, you're also spending a dot of willpower to make things happen. Then we have a dice pool. So you're going to be rolling a dice pool, usually, to make your contract hit off, so you have a chance of success or failure. Sometimes dice pools will tell you whether or not you're rolling against somebody else to make the contract happen. Otherwise, it's just rolling 2 stats from your character sheet. Then we have something called the catch. So the catch is a very specific requirement, or a loophole, if you will, that allows you to enact the contract without having to pay the cost. And this plays very much into the whole themes about changelings and fairies, where sometimes you can make things happen if you know how to bend the rules a little bit. Now, keep in mind that fulfilling the catch only takes care of the glamour cost, so if you're using the catch in something that requires a point of willpower, you still have to pay the point of willpower to make the thing happen. Also, if you take a look at some of these catches, you'll see that the first catch is usually pretty easy to fulfill, and the more magical you get, so the higher levels of contracts that you're using, the more difficult it is to fulfill the catch. It is a lot easier to play a game against someone you've caught cheating before than it is to play a game against someone who's died recently, or to play a game that you recently played with a deceased person. Then we have the description. So the description is just going to tell us what the contract does, or what the clause of the contract does. It's a very simplified description, so if you want to take a look at the book, there are page numbers here in this final column here, and looking in the book will tell you what a failure versus a success looks like, what a dramatic failure or a dramatic success looks like, and it might also give you hints as to what might give you dice boosts and what might give you negative penalties, depending on what you're using the contract for. We have all of the universal contracts at the top here, and I'm going to scroll down to the seeming contracts to figure out what kind of contracts we want for our fairest. Let's go down to our fairest contracts here and see what our options are. So right away I am drawn to contracts of vainglory because these are contracts that focus very much on your social skills and help you convince others around you to believe or do certain things. However, the very first clause of vainglory requires 2 points of glamour to use. That's kind of expensive, and while I definitely want to focus on that later down the road, I don't think I have the ability to use it right away, so I'm going to take a look at what the other fairest contracts have for me. We have contracts of separation and contracts of reflection. The contracts of separation are very good for getting yourself out of sticky situations, and the contracts of reflection help you with using mirrors for different kinds of abilities. I think that because our character is very focused on their looks and appearing in a very certain way, contracts of reflection really matches their vibe. So I am going to take that. Now, one thing to note is that on this character sheet, if it's a drop-down menu, you have limited choices. Most of the choices are on here, but there are a 1 or 2 contracts that don't show up, and reflections is one of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take the quote-unquote mirror contract, which is technically a universal contract, and I am going to take a dot on it, but I'm going to make a note here that the mirror contract is actually the contract of reflections. So with that in mind, we're just going to take the first dot in reflections, which allows you to use a loved one's mirror if you want to fulfill a catch, or any mirror really, and allows you to observe what happened in a reflective surface over the last week. We would have to go to this specific source book to find out more about that contract. Now I'm also going to take a look at some of the universal contracts and see if there's anything that I would like to take for this character. And I do think that for this character, the contracts of dream look really interesting. They're very easy contracts to use. Each clause only requires 1 point of glamour to spend. They're intelligence-based contracts, which is definitely not our strong suit, but it's interesting for flavor. The contracts of dream allow you to manipulate dreams, which are great sources of glamour and are very useful for changelings who want to find out different kinds of pieces of information. So I'm just going to take the first clause, Pathfinder, in Contracts of Dream, and that's up here. And if I want to put more in-depth information about these contracts somewhere, I'm probably going to have to write it down or find a note sheet that I can just fill out that information. Some storytellers might have some more information ready for you, so talk to your storyteller and see if they have those resources. Otherwise, you're just going to have to make those notes yourself. A special note for anybody who is going to be playing an elemental of some sort. There are some really cool elemental contracts, specifically contracts of communion and contracts of elements that I want to talk about. When you choose these contracts, you choose the specific element that you are interacting with. So if you choose contracts of communion and you are a waterborne elemental, you might want to take water as the chosen element that you're interacting with. However, you could take that contract a second time and choose a second element that you are in communication with. So you could have contracts of communion water, and then also have contracts of communion fog, or contracts of communion air, or contracts of communion fire, right? And the same thing goes for contracts of elements. You choose a specific element that you have the ability to manipulate. And if you want to have access to a second element to manipulate, you have to take the contract a second time. If you're going to play an elemental, you're likely going to want to take the element that you're most associated with, but some elementals might associate with more than one element. There are options for taking more than one kith that you could potentially exploit and then have more elements that you're manipulating, but just keep that in mind when you're making an elemental contract. Finally, for our character, we are going to want to take a look at our court contracts. As you can see, the court contracts are organized a little bit differently. The same information is here, but there's an additional column of the requirement if you're not a member of the court. So there's the court goodwill requirement here. You get access to the first clause of pretty much any court contract for free, because you can see that is waived. Anything higher than that, and you need a significant amount of court goodwill. A lot of these contracts also have willpower costs built into some of them, so that's a thing you're going to want to keep an eye out for. And you'll see that a lot of these court contracts require you to have some kind of mantle to be able to add to your dice pool, so having presence within the court increases your chances of success. And that's why it usually recommends that you're part of the court that has domain over that contract. The summer court contracts, there's 3 of them. With all of the seasonal courts, there's 3 options, but the third option is usually not recommended for a starting character because the things that you're doing in the prerequisites for them can be a little bit more difficult to use. So we're going to just take a look at the eternal and the fleeting options. Every single seasonal court has an eternal option and a fleeting option. when it comes to the summer court, our options are based around heat and light for eternal summer, and wrath and anger for fleeting summer. Now let's take a look for 1 second at one thing in the fleeting summer, and that is your Goblin's Malignance option here. This is the second clause in Fleeting Summer. It redirects the focus of a subject's wrath, and you can roll Manipulation plus Persuasion. Our character has a decent amount of manipulation and very high persuasion, so this is a very easy contract to use for us. Not only that, it only costs 1 glamour to use, and if we take it, we'll have access to anything that's below it. So I think that taking Goblin's Malignance, or the second dot of Fleeting Summer, is a really strong choice for us. And with that, we have chosen 5 dots in our contracts, so we've hit our maximum amount of dots that we can choose. We've got 3 contracts, we've got 5 different clauses that we can use, a lot of small powers, but they're all pretty accessible for us. And with that, I think we are done. So, that there is Changeling the Lost character creation. Thank you for watching, and happy gaming!